In the next 25 minutes, Nick will talk about poverty and how you can help in our community, featuring Cindy Ortiz-Taylor sharing her story, Rob from See You at Home, and Anchor Worship. Welcome to Anchor Church. We're so glad you're here.
The reason why I had to work 3 jobs was because I didn't qualify for public aid. I made about $100 too much a month, but then if I quit, then I wouldn't have enough money to pay other bills. So I remember laying in bed often just crying out to God on what bill I was going to pay. And if I paid the power bill, then I wouldn't have enough money for the rent. If I paid the rent, I wouldn't have enough money for the phone bill or the water bill. And I just remember saying to God, when is this going to end? I couldn't pay the bills anymore, and we ended up in a homeless shelter for 3 months. And I didn't want anybody to know that we were living there, so I would often take different routes on the bus so that my friends wouldn't know that we were getting off at the shelter. There were times when I was in the checkout lane with groceries and I had to use food stamps, and I didn't want anybody to know about it, or I was afraid that I was going to run into people, and I would hide my face, turn my head, and just hope that the cashier would check us out really quickly. And it was hard. I remember looking back when I used to have to get toys for Christmas time for my children, and worrying about how they would react to getting used toys. And then as they got old enough and we talked about that, they told me that they didn't care what they got because I showed them the best thing, and that was loving them. And that's all they needed was love, not brand new toys.
Hi, and Merry Christmas. My name is Hannah, and I wanted to know something about you today. I wanted to be able to get to know you in the comments. So, I don't know about you, but I have a Christmas song that when it comes onto the playlist or onto the radio, I have to stop what I'm doing and switch it right away. There's like no exceptions. And so I want to know what that Christmas song is for you. We all have one. What is your least favorite Christmas song? Can you comment right now what that song is? I'll share mine while you're doing that. Mine is The Little Drummer Boy, and I don't know if it has more with the fact that like he just keeps repeating himself over and over and over and over and over again, like way too much, or if it has to do with the fact that he's like interrupting a baby's sleep. Like this baby was just born and he's coming in and like banging on a drum. And what baby wants to hear that after they were just born? I don't think very many. So comment below and get to know each other in the comments, and let's listen to the message now.
So Santa and I did not get off on the right foot. You see, when I was 5 years old, I met Santa. My mom brought us out to the school gymnasium, and there were tons and tons of families packed into this place, and Santa was right in the middle, the big guy sitting on his throne, surrounded by a million angels worshiping him. I mean, it was something of magic and wonder and awe all mixed in together. There's this huge line to get to see Santa, and it took about 3.5 weeks, and finally when we got to the front of the line, he was passing out presents. And I'll never forget being handed this present by Santa. My mom gives me a nod saying, "You can open it now," and I ripped that thing open so fast. I mean, it was pure bliss for me until I saw what was inside of that thing. You see, I opened it up and I pulled out this winter hat. I mean, really, what 5-year-old wants a winter hat from Santa? But it gets worse. It wasn't just a winter hat, no. It was a Winnie the Pooh winter hat. I mean, really, Santa? Winnie the Pooh? I mean, I could have gotten Rugrats and would have loved Rugrats. Would have loved Aladdin, Lion King. I mean, there were options. I would have been fine with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or even Power Rangers. Any of that would have been fine. Not Winnie the Pooh. And that year, and that moment where I tried to force a smile and a thank you to Santa, I learned 2 very important lessons from Santa that year. Number 1, I learned about myself, and number 2, I learned about the world. Number 1, I learned I was a poor kid. And number 2, I learned poor kids get Pooh hats. So as I grew up, I continued to be a poor kid. When I was in middle school, my mom brought me to the store, picked out 5 shirts off the clearance rack, gave me them 5 shirts, and those 5 shirts were my 5 shirts that would last me 5 years. And everyone around me started to notice I did not fit into my shirts anymore, but somehow I was the last one to notice. As I was going into high school, all my friends were joining this club, International Club, and I started to come to this after-school club with all my friends, and it was fun, and you got to play games and learn about other cultures, and people were super nice, and I was really having a good time until week 2 happens, and they start talking about different trips they want to go on. And in my head, as the poor kid, I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm going to afford a $25 trip. I don't know who I'm going to borrow it from, how I'm going to scrimp and scrape for it. And the whole idea of asking people for money and all that just really exhausted me. And so after a couple weeks, I just slowly started backing away from the club. And people would ask me, where you been? And I'd say something lame like, well, I'm just getting busy. I don't know if I have time for it. deep down I knew I was too poor for it, or at least too poor to deal with it. Now, years went by and I became an adult. And a few years ago, I started to realize I'm not the poor kid anymore. I can afford my own groceries, and I can afford to get around places, and I can afford Christmas and things like that. And it's really weird where I'm at, because I thought not being poor would mean I'd be filled with all kinds of pride in my accomplishments, right? No, but that doesn't really happen. It kind of leaves me feeling guilty a lot of times. I kind of feel bad that I have a running car, or I feel bad when I go on vacation. I feel bad about certain things. It also leaves me feeling confused. I would have thought that I would have a lot of answers to those hard questions about poverty, but it's like the questions are still there, and in some ways they're even deeper and more complex. I think about things like, in the wealthiest nation on the planet, how is it that we have about 500,000 people who are homeless? I think about in the world as a whole, how is it that every minute 12 kids die of preventable causes? With all the resources that we've come to, all the technology we've come to, how is it that there's still so many people who are dying of poverty? I think about the responsibility questions. What should we do? I think about the possibility questions. What could we do? I think about who's to blame for all this. I think, is it the powerful people who are getting poor people poor? Or is it the poor people who are keeping poor people poor? And so with all of these different questions, here's what I want to do today, is I want to give 4 different myths. Myths that you may have thought, but myths that I definitely thought that just aren't true. And a lot of this comes from a book called When Helping Hurts. Steve Corbett, he gives a lot of insights into the areas of poverty. Myth number 1, it's all about the money. So right where you're at, go ahead and maybe do a little bit of this. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. Do this, or, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Right where you're at, you'll remember it a little better. It's all about the money, right? Wrong. You see, in different surveys, it's actually showed that when you were to survey people in North America, people in affluence, and ask them to define poverty, they would say something along the lines of a lack of material wealth. But if you were to ask people in poverty, people around the world, to define poverty, they wouldn't define it as a lack of material wealth. They would define it as feeling stuck, feeling powerless, feeling a sense of shame. You see, they would define poverty in psychological terms, not in physical, material terms. And so for us to solve any problems about poverty, we got to actually understand what poverty is. And so that's where Corbett comes into place. He says that when we understand poverty, we got to think about the 4 relationships we were designed to have. We're supposed to have a relationship with God, others, ourselves, and creation. And when any of those relationships go bad, that's how you can see poverty. And so if you have this holistic approach to poverty, that means that we all, in some way, shape, or form, we're all broken and we're all poor in some way. I think that's what James had in mind when he writes in James 1:9-10. Believers who are poor have something to boast about, for God has honored them. And those who are rich should boast that God has humbled them. They will fade away like a little flower in the field. So what is James saying? James is saying that the poor have something to boast about, and the rich have something to boast about. The poor should boast about how much God has lifted them up, and the rich should boast about the fact that their lives will end, that they're like a flower that fades away, that our life is really, really just a little spark. You see, some of us are broken because we're materially poor, and we need to feel a little better about ourselves. We feel inferior. Some of us are broken because maybe we're materially rich or well off. A lot of us in America would be in that camp. And what we need to work on is we need to be brought down a little bit because we have the problem of being superior. And so all of us have something to deal with, and all of us have our own form of poverty. So that's the first myth, is that it's all about the money. The second myth is this, is that it's all about the heart. Go ahead and put your hand on your heart right now. Put your hand on your heart. It's all about the heart. This myth is more of a Christian myth. You see, when I was 6 years old, a pastor came over to my house, shared the gospel with my mom, told me and my mom that it's all about whether or not you know you're going to heaven. And the logic seems so flawless. I have held on to this for almost all of my life, is that really all that matters is transforming a person's heart so that they can go to heaven, right? Because if your life right now decides what happens in eternity, then it really doesn't matter so much what happens in this life or the comfort or the satisfaction you have in this life, so long as the next life is taken care of. And so all that really matters is taking care of a person's heart, their soul, their spiritual health, not necessarily their physical well-being. And that logic makes so much sense, except for the fact that Jesus said in Matthew 25 that there'll be a day where there will be two groups of people, the sheep and the goats. And he'll say to the sheep, look, you saw me naked and you clothed me. You saw me hungry and you fed me. You saw me imprisoned and you visited me. And then he'll turn to the goats and he will say to them, you saw me in need and you did nothing. And both groups of people will say, when did we see you in need? And Jesus will say, well, what you did to the least of these, you've done to me. Jesus says it's not just about the heart. He says it's about caring for the needs of the people around you. In fact, if you neglect to care for the needs of the people around you, it's as if you showed that same disrespect to Jesus himself. And there's been a problem in the church in the recent past. Historians call it the Great Reversal, where there was a time where the church took care of the poor and did so much to care for the needy. And yet, because of a theological, just a little tweak where we said that it's all about the heart, it's not about physical needs, we said we're just going to double down on preaching the gospel and we're not going to do anything to care for the poor. There was a reversal where the government had to step in and do all these different things, where we're at right now in our country where the government does so much that the church used to do. And so we need to remember this myth is not just about the heart alone. The third myth is this, is do something, anything. So right where you're at, go ahead and do a big shrug, anything. Do something, anything. And I know you've had this moment where you're driving out of Target and you see someone with a cardboard box and your heart melts and you feel so guilty for not doing something. And so you just think, I just got to do something. I got to give something. It doesn't matter what it is. I just got to do something, anything. But that thinking is a myth. That's wrong, because that could actually be dangerous. You see, there was an American company that wanted to help out this African poor village that needed desperately access to clean water. Well, what the company did is they built a well for the village. Problem was, they had this attitude of, we just got to do something, anything. And they didn't realize what they had done was they made it so difficult for the village, because what they did is they built the well on the other side of a huge, massive highway. And what they did is they put people in a situation that for them to get clean water, they would have to risk their lives every single day. One day goes by, and a mom who sends her daughter out just to get water hears word that she'll never see her daughter again. You see, there is a danger sometimes for us to just do anything. It can be dangerous. It can be harmful. It may not necessarily kill a person by you trying to help and not knowing what you're doing, but it could kill their reputation. It could kill their dignity. It could keep them feeling inferior. And so what we got to do is, if we're going to do something to help somebody, we got to lean in, and we've got to build relationships, and we got to work together to find needs. And so something that could be a good practice is, instead of you personally just doing anything, maybe something you could do to help is you could see what already is being done and see what kind of organizations you can come alongside of. People who deeply care for those in need and are learning their needs better and better. You can come alongside and see what can you do to help their mission. I think of Ephesians 2:10. It says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." You see, you were made for good works. And if you say yes to everything, that means you're going to be saying no to the very best things. And so we want to remember that, and we want to be deliberate about the things we say yes to. Myth number 4. Myth number 4 is do something big. Do something as long as it's something really big and noticeable. So go ahead right where you're at, make big gesture right now. Do something big, because if it's too small, it doesn't really matter, right? Not exactly. I can remember when Han and I, a year ago, we were raising support to move to Champaign and start church. And some of the people who gave the smallest amounts, we knew they were giving sacrificially. They were giving out of lack. And to us, that did so much to build into us a faith that God is working, that people believe in us. And some of the smallest gestures meant the most to us. And for you, I want you to remember that some small gestures do not get missed. For you, God may not be calling you to do something huge right away, but God may be calling you just for something small right now. Jesus said in Matthew 10:42, "And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward." One of the smallest gestures we can do to give a cup of cold water to somebody in need. And Jesus says, you won't lose your reward for that. What is that for you? What is that cold water for you? Maybe it's donating a coat to somebody in need. Maybe for you, that cup of cold water is getting to know someone who is homeless and in need and just spending an hour with them. Maybe it's a really small gesture that could mean a lot to somebody and a lot to Jesus. What is it for you? I love this image of a glass of cold water, because it means any one of us can do something good for somebody. All of us have access to something. You know, I think of Jesus, who was homeless, and his cup of cold water was giving of himself. You see, Jesus at the end of his life had everything taken from him. He didn't have a home, and the clothes he was wearing was actually stripped off him, and it was gambled away to others. And so what did Jesus have? Jesus still showed generosity. According to Isaiah 50, what Jesus had, he gave. He gave his back to be beaten. He gave his face to be spat on. And he gave his beard to be pulled and ripped apart. Jesus gave everything at his disposal so that you may have eternal life, so that you may be forgiven of your sins. This is what Jesus has done for you. And so as we wrap up, I want to ask you, do you know Jesus as your Savior? Have you accepted that kind of forgiveness that Jesus offers for you by dying on the cross for you? Have you received the cup of cold water from him? And if you have, what are you going to do with your own cup of cold water?
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender. home. Christ the Savior is born. Silent night, holy night, Son of God, love's pure light, radiant beams from thy holy face, with the dawn of redeeming grace. Jesus, Lord, at thy birth. Jesus, Lord, at thy birth.
Hey there, Anchor Church. This is Rob Dahlhaus, Executive Director at See You at Home. And in a recent conversation I had with Pastor Nick, we were talking about just what's going on at See You at Home, and wanted to share some updates with you as a church. So right now, we are actually in the middle of our One Winter Night season. One Winter Night is a powerful community awareness event that we do where we have community members and partners come together and spend one night outside in a cardboard box to really get a sense of what it would be like to sleep on the street here in Champaign. This event helps us raise over 50% of our annual budget to support all that we do here at See You at Home, which includes 24-hour street outreach, connecting with local law enforcement and hospitals and businesses and concerned citizens when they run across one of our folks. This helps support our transitional housing that we offer, which we have 4 of those here in town, 2 men's houses, a women's house, and a family house. It also helps support our daytime drop-in center where our friends from the street and our friends from the community can come together and start building those trusting relationships that help our friends achieve greater success. It also helps us offer a work program where we take our men and women on the street and offer them manual labor jobs so that they can feel empowered and feel the dignity that comes from a good day's work and getting paid for it at the end of the day. And finally, one of the coolest things we've got going on in the last year is the resurgence of men's and women's year-round emergency overnight shelter. If you would believe, we have not had a year-round men and women's overnight shelter in this community in nearly 20 years. And just in the last calendar year, from October of 2019 to October of 2020, we saw over 630 different men and over 130 different women come through those shelters. That is massive impact. That is an incredible opportunity for us to pour the love of Jesus into the men and women that we're serving. And honestly, friends, we couldn't do it without you. So I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity to share an update with you on what's going on. If you're interested in getting involved in One Winter Night or finding out more about See You at Home, you can always email me, rob@seeyouathome.us, or I'll give you my personal cell phone number. It's 217-417-2561. Give me a call, shoot me a text, and would love to connect with you more. Have a blessed day. Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, from our family to yours.
Merry Christmas.